Today, let me tell you a story in the form of an essay. The title of the story is called The Optimization Trap, a modern parable of money, merch, and the meaning of enough. The central argument: in our hyper-connected, status-obsessed world, the real challenge isn't achieving success, it's recognizing when you've already won and having the wisdom to stop playing games that can never truly be won. Prologue: the algorithm knows. There's a particular kind of modern torment that happens when you open LinkedIn on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The algorithm, with its unholy intelligence, serves you exactly the content designed to make you question every life choice you've made. Today, it was Nick's face staring back from a post about his latest business milestone: $400,000 a month, financial freedom, speaking on stages next to entrepreneurial demigods like Alex Hormozy. Our protagonist, let's call him David, felt the familiar pang. Not quite jealousy, not quite inspiration, something more complex. The uncomfortable recognition that he was looking at a path he had once considered walking, a life he had once thought he wanted. David closed his laptop. He had work to do, his actual job, the one that paid him $115,000 a year, gave him evenings free for piano practice, let him sleep soundly without weight of other people's dreams crushing his chest. But the seed was planted. By evening, he would find himself down a rabbit hole that revealed far more about himself than about the entrepreneur he was studying. Point 1. The mirror that reflects your soul. Nick wasn't just another LinkedIn success story. He was a funhouse mirror reflecting David's own past back at him in distorted, amplified form. Both immigrants, Nick from Bulgaria, David from China. Both had tried the entrepreneurial game. Both lived in Calgary, that peculiar Canadian city where oil money meets tech ambition. David had even spoken to Nick once, a brief consultation call that ended with David canceling his $20,000 investment in Nick's automation course after realizing it wasn't for him. But Nick had taken the path to its logical extreme, where David had increased his income by about 50% and stepped back. Nick had optimized his ways to millions. Where David had chosen balance, Nick had chosen acceleration. The comparison was inevitable, uncomfortable, and illuminating. I knew a dude making $290K USD per month, David typed to his AI companion, Claude, plus other sources, just a one-man show. The number hung in the digital air like a challenge, a question mark, an accusation. What followed was an archaeological dig through David's own motivations. Why did seeing Nick's success trigger something in him? Was he satisfied with his own choices, or was he just telling himself a comforting story to avoid confronting his own limitations? Point 2. The hedonic treadmill that has no finish line. The research into Nick's journey revealed a story that was both inspiring and cautionary. Nick's blog post, raw, honest, uncomfortably transparent, documented a man who had achieved everything he thought he wanted and found it wanting. "I've become disillusioned with wealth," Nick wrote in his December 2024 reflection. "There were many things I was looking forward to doing when I finally had money. Now that I do, I don't care much for them. The expensive dinners tasted mid-tier. The luxury experiences felt hollow. The financial freedom came with social isolation." Nick had spent years optimizing for money, only to discover that the optimization itself had become the trap. David read these words with a mixture of vindication and sadness. Here was a man making 40 times David's income, documenting his loneliness in real time, admitting that wealth hadn't solved the problems he thought it would solve. But then came Nick's January 2025 bombshell, a complete philosophical pivot. He wrote, "I'm satisfied with my income. I no longer want to optimize for money." Nick was stepping back, choosing relationships over revenue, health over hustle. At 28, making $400,000 a month, he was essentially saying, that's enough. It was the kind of wisdom that usually takes decades to develop, compressed into a few brutal years of hyper-optimization. Nick had speedrun the American dream, emerged with the same conclusion that Buddhist monks had been preaching for millennia. Attachment to material outcome is the root of suffering. Point 3. The comparison game has no winners. But knowing this intellectually and feeling it emotionally were completely different things. David found himself caught in a peculiar psychological loop. He would rationally understand that Nick's path wasn't for him, could even feel grateful for his own balanced life, and simultaneously feel a stab of inadequacy when confronted with Nick's success. This wasn't unique to entrepreneurship. It was the human condition in microcosm. Even Jeff Bezos, with his $200 billion fortune, probably looked at Nvidia's $1 trillion valuation and felt a twinge of competitive anxiety. The goalpost always moves. There's always someone richer, more successful, more optimized. The cruel mathematics of comparison culture. Everyone has someone above them to feel inferior to, and someone below them to feel superior to. David made more than the struggling $30,000 a year worker, who didn't question whether money mattered because money would solve all their immediate problems. But David made less than Nick, who made less than a tech billionaire, who made less than oil tycoons, who made less than sovereign wealth funds. Where does it end? It doesn't. The only winning move is not to play. But the game is designed to be unplayable. Opting out requires a kind of spiritual discipline that most people never deploy. Point 4. The parasocial economy and the price of belonging. While David was excavating his feelings about entrepreneurial success, another drama was playing out in his digital life. His favorite content creators, twin VTubers named Fuamoko, had released limited edition merchandise, celebrating their second-year anniversary. The price: $185 for the items, $150 for shipping, a whopping $343 total. In the Discord server, fans were posting screenshots of their purchases with the enthusiasm of lottery winners. David felt the familiar pressure: participate or be left out. But something had changed him over the past year. A year earlier, David might have spent 20% of his income on super chats, trying to buy moments of recognition from creators who would never know his name. He had burned through $500 in digital tips, chasing the dopamine hit of having his message read aloud. His username briefly illuminated in the parasocial spotlight. But David had evolved past that particular trap. He could appreciate the creator's work, find inspiration in their decade-long journey to success, enjoy the community they had built, all without needing to prove his devotion through financial sacrifice. The 343 merch drop became a perfect test case. David wanted the items. They would have signatures from them truly. But he didn't need them. The old David would have justified the expense somehow. The new David could simply say, "This is too expensive for what it is." His Discord friend offered to lend him merch for concerts, gifted him prints, invited him to dinners. The real relationships weren't transactional. The people who mattered to him didn't keep score of who spent more on creator merchandise. Point 5. The wisdom of artificial constraints. What separated David from both Nick's hyper-optimization and the parasocial spending sprees wasn't willpower. It was recognition, perhaps defeat. Recognizing defeat, that constraints create meaning. Video games become boring when you enable cheat codes. Infinite money removes the strategic element that makes gameplay engaging. The same principle applied to life. Having enough money to make real choices was liberating, but having so much that no choice had consequences was its own kind of prison. David's $115 salary was enough to buy a house, save for retirement, take piano lessons, travel to Japan for anime conventions. It was enough to live a full, rich life without the stress of financial insecurity. Everything above that threshold was luxury, and luxury, as Nick had discovered, became boring super fast. The functional difference between David's income and Nick's wasn't happiness or fulfillment, it was optionality. Nick could afford virtually anything, but found that anything wasn't particularly interesting. David had to make choices. Choices created engagement with life. Point 6. The monastery and the marketplace. Even the most hardcore optimization addicts eventually circle back to ancient wisdom. Alex Hormozy, the poster child for grind until you die entrepreneurship, had started talking about meditation and the contentment of simple work. The gym trainer who was happy on day 1 and still happy 10 years later, doing the exact same job, had something that no amount of business success could buy. David realized he was wrestling with a 2,500-year-old question that Buddha had tried to answer. How much is enough? What actually leads to contentment? And why does everyone suffer, irrespective of material success? Some monks tell aspiring students to go achieve material success first and then come back. Otherwise, you are just escaping, they say. The implication being that you need to test the hypothesis of materialism before you can genuinely reject it. David had done his testing. He had tried the entrepreneurial path, increased his income significantly, tasted success. He had already spent money on parasocial relationships, chased validation through digital spending, felt the hollow victory of super chat recognition. In both cases, he had gathered enough data to make an informed choice. The monastery could wait. He had already found his version of the middle path. Point 7. The Calgary advantage. There was something fitting about David and Nick ending up in Calgary. It was a city that embodied the tension between ambition and contentment, between oil money flashiness and Canadian practicality. You can make a fortune there, but you're still Canadian. Apologetic, reasonable, aware that your good fortune was partially due to luck. Calgary wasn't trying to be Silicon Valley or New York. It's a place where you could achieve financial success without losing your soul to the optimization game, where a house was still affordable, where winters were long enough to force you indoors to think about what really mattered. David's $115 salary went further in Calgary than it would in Toronto or Vancouver. Nick's millions bought him options, but also isolation from normal human concerns. Both were products of their environment, a city that rewarded hard work but didn't worship it, that respected success but didn't confuse it with virtue. Point 8. The self-awareness tax. The cruelest irony of David's position was his self-awareness might have been both his greatest strength and his heaviest burden. He could see the games being played around him with startling clarity, the status competition, the parasocial relationships, the optimization traps, the comparison cultures. But seeing clearly didn't make him immune to the emotions these games triggered. He still felt defensiveness when Nick posted about his success. He still felt pressure when Discord friends bought expensive merchandise. He still questioned whether his contentment was genuine wisdom or elaborate rationalization. The self-awareness tax Knowing that you are feeling something doesn't make you stop feeling it. Recognition is therapeutic, but it's not a cure. David had developed the ability to observe his own jealousy, insecurity, and competitive instincts in real time, but he still had to feel them. Maybe that was the point. The goal wasn't to eliminate human emotions, but to choose conscious responses to them. David felt the comparison anxiety about Nick and worked through it rather than acting on it. He felt the social pressure about merchandise and chose his own values instead of conforming. Each time he navigated one of these emotional challenges successfully, he was building psychological muscle. The defensiveness might always be there, but his relationship to it could evolve. Point 9. The luxury of choice. What David had achieved, perhaps without fully recognizing it, was the luxury of choice. Not infinite choice, which paralyzed and ultimately disappointed, but meaningful choice within reasonable constraints. He could choose to go to Vancouver for a concert, choose to save money for a Japan trip, choose to decline overpriced merchandise, choose to work at a job that didn't consume his soul. These weren't the choices of unlimited wealth, but they were choices of a free person. The 30,000 a year worker couldn't make these choices. They were still trapped in survival mode, where money solved immediate pressing problems. The 400,000 a month entrepreneur had transcended choice in some ways. They could afford anything, which made individual purchases meaningless. David occupied the sweet spot, where choices mattered but weren't life or death, where he had enough resources to live well but still had skin in the game, where decisions had consequences but not catastrophic ones. This was perhaps the most enviable position of all. Having enough agency to shape your life without having so much that life becomes shapeless. Point 10. The recursive loop of modern consciousness. The strangest part of David's journey wasn't the insights themselves, but the recursive nature of having them. He was aware that he was comparing himself to Nick, aware that he was feeling defensive about merchandise spending, aware that he was questioning his own contentment, aware that he was aware. This metacognition spiral was both exhausting and oddly comforting. At least he wasn't unconsciously reacting to everything, right? At least he was choosing his responses rather than being programmed by his environment. But it raised an uncomfortable question. Was all this self-reflection actually helping him live better? Or was it just another form of mental masturbation? Was he optimizing his psychological process the same way Nick had optimized his income streams? Maybe that was okay. Maybe the examined life was worth living, even if the examination itself became compulsive. Maybe consciousness was its own reward, even when it created new problems. David had spent 2 days in conversation with AI, excavating his motivations, comparing his path to successful entrepreneurs, questioning his relationship with money, status, and belonging. Tomorrow, he would go back to his job, practice piano, and maybe book that trip to Japan. The analysis would continue because that's what conscious minds do. They analyze. But the analysis was no longer driving his actions. He found the distinction between thinking and being, between understanding his emotions and being controlled by them. The epilogue, the concert in Vancouver. This weekend, David would fly to Vancouver to see his favorite content creators perform live. He would meet fans who had traveled from Japan, from across America, from every corner of the internet, where lonely people find community through shared obsessions. Some of these fans would be wearing those merchandise. Some would have spent their rent money on super chats. Some would have traveled continents and maxed out credit card for this moment. David would be wearing a t-shirt he bought last year, carrying a reasonable amount of cash for food and drinks, and drive back home, fly back home, on Monday in time for work. He wouldn't feel superior to bigger spenders or inferior to them. He would just be present, enjoying the music, meeting people who shared his appreciation for these creators who had somehow managed to build a career out of being adorably entertaining on the internet. After the show, he might drop a modest super chat, not to prove anything, but because the performance was worth supporting. He might buy a reasonably priced item for the merch table if there was something he genuinely wanted. But he wouldn't be trying to buy a relationship that didn't exist, or prove his devotion to people who didn't know his name, or compete with other fans for recognition that ultimately meant nothing. He would be a balanced person enjoying something he liked in a community of other people who liked the same thing, spending money that enhanced the experience rather than trying to purchase significance. On the flight back, he might think about Nick, wonder how his journey towards contentment was progressing, feel grateful that there were public examples of people choosing meaning over metrics. But mostly, he will think about the music, the friends he's made, the genuine human connection that cost nothing but time, and the openness and the willingness to be present for joy when it appeared. That perhaps was that winning actually looked like. Not the absence of wanting, but the wisdom to know which ones were worth pursuing and which were just mirages in the optimization desert. The highway stretched ahead, leading home to a life that was neither perfect nor perfectible, but undeniably, authentically his own. This essay is dedicated to everyone still trying to figure out the difference between having enough and having everything, between being content, being complacent, between living consciously and living in your head. The distinction matters, especially when it's impossible to draw perfect precision. Thank you, and as you can probably imagine, David was actually me, and most of the story is real. And that's about it. Thank you.